All right, so yesterday in our story, Teddy met Summer McCracken and he was able to whisper to her like a crazy person in a crowd of people that he thought that Henry the Hippo was murdered. And then she came and found him later, kind of sneakily. And we left off where they were going to meet at the Gorilla Grill in 15 minutes. It turned out Summer McCracken had thought I was a freak. But that turned out to be a good thing. Right after I had been sucked back into the crowd, Summer had asked her bodyguards, "Who was that nutball?" And they told her. "They know who I am?" I asked, surprised. Summer nodded. "It's their job. Daddy insists that they know everyone at the park for my protection. But there must be at least 2,000 employees here." "Well, they don't know everyone, of course, but they try to, and you're not too hard to remember, 'cause you're the only kid. Plus, they say you've caused some trouble here." I froze, worried. "Not really." "You didn't arm the chimpanzees with water balloons yesterday?" "How'd they know about that?" "They get debriefed by park security," Summer said. "Apparently, you also taught the sea lions to make rude noises during their show." "The show needed some comedy. Even the trainers thought it was funny." "And you started a rumor that the hot dogs were made of whatever animal died recently?" "That was an accident. I was joking, and someone believed me." "Whatever. Point is, my shadows told me to steer clear of you, which is why I'm here." We were seated in a small patch of grass behind the Gorilla Grill, not far from the restaurant's dumpster. It wasn't very scenic, but I had to admit it was a good place to avoid being seen. In all the months I'd been roaming around the fun jungle, including dozens of meals from Gorilla Grill, I'd never known this little spot of grass existed. I'd arrived a couple minutes before Summer, long enough to start worrying that she'd played a joke on me, pegging me as an innocent rube and sending me to stand among a bunch of garbage dumpsters just because she knew I'd do it. And then she'd wandered around the corner, smiling brightly, and asked if I was hungry. I was, as a 12-year-old boy, and I was almost always hungry. So Summer had slapped some cash in my hand and told me to go get a burger, fries, and Cokes. She couldn't do it, she said, because people would recognize her. I tried to protest. It didn't seem right to let a girl buy me lunch, but Summer waved it off, laughing, and said, "Trust me, I can afford it." So that's how we ended up having a picnic by the dumpsters. Summer explaining to me how she ditched her bodyguards. "I do it all the time," she said. "Daddy says they're there for my safety, but honestly, how much more conspicuous could they be? Each is like the size of a house. The moment anyone sees them, they know I'm here. And when I have to spend my whole day signing autographs, all I really want to do is see the animals. Fortunately, you're not too hard for me to shake. They're not too hard for me to shake, 'cause they're guys. Dad's still living 30 years ago. He doesn't think women can protect me. So all I have to do is say, I gotta go to the bathroom. And then what? And then what? Sneak out the windows." Please. Have you ever seen a public bathroom with a window? No. "Oh, and then what? Sneak out the window?" Please. Have you ever seen a public bathroom with a window? No. I just asked some girl if I can buy her hat and t-shirt off her. She was thrilled. She practically let me have them for free. Then I put them on and walked right out the door. That's why I wear pink all the time. When I change clothes, my shadows never realize it's me right away. This time, they didn't even recognize me till I started running. And by then, they didn't stand a chance. Those guys might be big, but they're not fast. They are probably having cows right now, thinking they're going to be fired when my dad finds out I got away again." "Do you do this a lot?" "I mix it up. If I do it too often, they'll put me under lockdown at home. So I play the good girl for a couple of weeks, let them think I've reformed, and then, once they drop their guard, I bolt." "Think they've called your dad?" "Not today. Daddy's in Indian business. It's the middle of the night there, and the last thing anyone wants to do is wake Daddy up and tell them they screwed up. Besides, they know I'll come back. I always do. So give me the scoop on the dead hippo." I was caught off guard for a moment. Summer had been talking almost non-stop since we sat down, barely letting me get a word in, telling me what she knew about rather than asking me questions about it. At first, I'd assumed this was because she was conceited and liked to hear herself talk, but I was starting to think that maybe she didn't have normal conversations very often. Summer got interviewed by reporters a lot, but her bodyguards seemed to keep to the rest of the world at arm's length. And now, suddenly, she was looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to talk. So I told her everything. About finding finding Henry dead, sneaking into the autopsy, Doc's murder theory, how I'd called the police to no avail, the heel print outside our trailer, right up to how I'd been scoping out Hippo River. I was nervous at first, worried that she'd think I was a loser with an overactive imagination, but she seemed really into what I had to say. Summer didn't simply listen the way Mom had, though. She interrupted me constantly, and yet it wasn't annoying the way it was when most people interrupted. It was kind of fun, because Summer had some good ideas and a lot of smart questions. She turned out not to be so self-absorbed at all. Instead, she was interested in all sorts of things. She was fascinated by my mother's work, forcing me to go off on a whole digression about her research, and then she'd been really excited by my life in the jungle, asking me about everything from whether I'd ever seen lions make a kill to how a pit toilet worked. By the time I finally finished my story, over an hour had slid by, and I had to keep reminding myself that this was Summer McCracken, and I was sitting there talking to, because she didn't really seem like the girl in the pictures of the supermarket checkout magazines. Instead, she seemed like, well, a friend. I hadn't had many friends my age. The kids in Atlanta had thought I was some kind of weird jungle boy from Africa, and we lived too far from any other children in Texas, so making a new friend was a rare experience for me. After my story was done, Summer nodded thoughtfully, taking it all in, and then said, "I know how to get into Hippo River." For maybe the 200th time since I'd met her, I was thrown. "You mean, you want to help me find what killed Henry?" "Well, it's either that or go back home and watch TV. I don't know if you've noticed, but except for Fun Jungle, this area is awfully boring." Summer smiled, and I couldn't help but smile back. I couldn't believe what she was offering. Summer probably had hundreds of friends, and there must be thousands of people who would have given anything to spend time with her, and yet here she was, offering to help me investigate? Any concern I'd had about getting into Henry's pool quickly drained away. I wasn't alone anymore. This was gonna be fun. Hidden in the lush landscaping around Hippo River was a door. It was how the zookeepers and maintenance workers accessed the hippo enclosure. I had known it was there. All the animal exhibits had an entry door tucked away somewhere, but I'd assumed it was impossible to get through. There was high security on all the exhibits at the Fun Jungle, partly to keep the animals in, but more importantly, to keep humans out. Mom had told me plenty of stories about people breaking into zoo exhibits. When she'd worked in the Bronx Zoo, people routinely tried to steal animals, which were worth a lot of money on the exotic pet market. 3 idiots had even tried to swipe an adult tiger once. 2 had ended up in the hospital, and 1 had ended up in the morgue. Unfortunately, most zoos couldn't afford very elaborate security, but Fun Jungle could. The doors were all double-bolted and alarmed. In addition, the doors didn't have keys. Instead, each had a keypad. If you entered the right code, the door would open. The codes were changed every day and sent to authorized employees via encrypted emails, but there were still some ways around the system. For example, I wasn't authorized to have the code for Monkey Mountain, but Mom could just tell me the new one every morning. Then I could go and see her whenever I wanted without making her come open the door for me. But for the most part, the security seemed to have worked very well. To my surprise, Summer revealed there was a secret code, one that never changed, and that opened every door. Her father's personal code. J.J. McCracken wanted to go wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted, without having to learn a new code every time. So, he'd have his own code built into the system, and he'd shared it with his daughter. The door opened with a soft click, leading into the dark corridor that smelled like damp hay. Summer led the way in, not hesitating for a moment. She didn't seem to have any sense that what we were doing was wrong. Instead, she seemed to regard all of Fun Jungle as though she owned the place, which, I realized, she kind of did. Still, we'd taken care to do this when none of the keepers were around. It wasn't hard to arrange. With only 1 hippo left, there wasn't much need for keepers at Hippo River. All the keepers' schedules were posted outside the administration building. We merely had to check the one for Hippo River before heading over. According to it, the hippo keeper wasn't due to check on Hildegard again until 4:30. As it was only 2 p.m., this gave us plenty of time to search Henry's enclosure. My only concern was that the schedule wasn't rock solid. If any of Hildegard's keepers felt the need to check on her for any reason, they could drop by Hippo River, and if they did, they'd certainly notice us swimming in Henry's pool. So I was a little bit nervous, though I did my best to hide it around Summer. I followed her through the tunnel. The pumps that filtered the river and powered the waterfall were so loud we had to shout over them. The hydraulic system also appeared to be leaking. There were numerous slick spots and puddles on the floor. It was much more dank and depressing access than Monkey Mountain, which had lots of windows into the exhibit and always smelled like oranges. Does anyone have the secret code except your father and you, I asked? Summer glanced at me over her shoulder, intrigued. Henry's killer didn't need a code. You said he could have thrown the weapons into Henry's mouth. Maybe. I was only wondering if I killed him. I blushed so hard I could feel my ears turn red. No, I didn't mean I might have stammered for another 5 minutes if Summer hadn't burst into laughter. Relax, Teddy. I'm just busting your chops. I don't know if anyone else has the code. I don't think my father would have shared it with anyone else, but he might have. Why'd he tell you? 'Cause this is my park. You've heard my father, right? It was all my idea. Do you sneak into exhibits a lot? I don't have to. I've been around Fun Jungle for years. Daddy brought me here all the time while it was being built. There's probably no place I haven't been in. So this is the first time you've snuck in somewhere? Of course not. Summer grinned mischievously, the way a young gorilla would when it had something it knew you wanted. Before I could ask her to elaborate, she ducked through the door. Here we go, she said. I followed her into the dankest room yet. It smelled like mold. There were several large bins inside. Summer was already digging into the first, pulling out what looked like a long, transparent hose. Come on, she said. Time to go swimming. The bins held a variety of equipment to let keepers and maintenance men access the hippo's water. There were masks, swim fins, but instead of snorkels, there were hoses, which had mouthpieces to breathe through, and they ran up to the surface. This allowed people to spend as much time as they wanted underwater without needing scuba gear, which J.J. McCracken considered dangerous and expensive. The hoses were heavy and unwieldy, but we eventually lugged all the equipment through the tunnel, up the flight of stairs, and into Henry's enclosure. It was weird being on the other side of the fence. I had spent countless hours looking into this enclosure, but I'd never had the chance to enter it before. As the viewing areas were all barricaded, no one could see us except for the tourists crowded at the Umfidency Scenic Viewpoint, and their view was so limited it wasn't hard to stay out of their line of sight. To be safe, though, we piled the gear in a small protected cove well hidden from view. I eyeballed the water cautiously, still concerned about hippo poop. But with Henry gone, the water looked significantly cleaner, more blue than brown, and it appeared that after Henry's body had been removed, someone had dispatched a crew to spruce up the place. Henry's favorite backwater, which had concerned me the most, didn't look like a sewage dump anymore. The whole area smelled vaguely like bleach. It's been cleaned, I said. Thank goodness, Summer replied. But if the hippo poop's gone, then the stuff that was in it might be gone too. Not necessarily. Hippo poop usually floats on the surface. If the things we're looking for were heavier, a lot of them might have dropped out. I stared at Summer, impressed. She was right. I'd never met an American girl who knew about hippo poop before, or anything about hippos, really. Summer continued on, scoping out the river. I think I'd be best to look on the bottom of the deepest parts. It's probably only 10 or 12 feet there. She selected a diving mask and then, to my astonishment, started to unbutton her shorts. I must have done a poor job of hiding my surprise because Summer looked at me and said, What? You're not putting on a bathing suit? Did you bring one? No, I thought they had them here or something. Summer laughed. For kids who want to break in? I mean, for the keepers. I thought we could use them. No such luck. I could feel myself turning red again. Summer had a talent for embarrassing me, which she seemed to find amusing. Don't have a heart attack, she said. I'm keeping on my undies. With that, she dropped her shorts and nonchalantly kicked them aside. It seemed wrong to stare, so I averted my eyes and looked at my feet. You can keep your shorts on if you want to, Summer said, but it'll be a lot more comfortable if you don't. I heard her footsteps race away and then a light splash as she dove into the pool. When I looked back, she was already gone from sight. Only her breathing tube was visible as it snaked out of the water. I didn't really feel like taking my shorts off, but I suspected that if I kept them on, Summer would probably tease me about it, which seemed worse than just going swimming in my underwear. So, as quickly as I could, I peeled off my clothes, down to my jockey shorts, grabbed a mask, and slipped into the water. As it was a boiling hot day, the water was wonderfully cool. It wasn't completely clean, though. Apparently, even Hippo River high-tech filtration systems couldn't remove every ounce of Henry's filth from the water. I could see my hand in front of my face, and the glimmer of the glass view wall not too far in the distance, but that was it. The edges of the enclosure were obscured in a light haze of what I hoped was natural sediment and not leftover hippo poop. Summer had already vanished into the murk. The air tasted stale, like the water from the garden hose, but I was able to breathe. I kicked from the bottom to found it closer than I expected. It was cement flecked with occasional pieces of brown gunk. I wasn't sure what that brown gunk was, but I opted not to examine any of it. Something metal glinted by. Excited, I ran over to inspect it, thinking it might be the murder weapon. Instead, it turned out to be a metal groove fitted into the bottom of the tank. The edges were steel with a gap of perhaps a half an inch between them. I stuck my fingers into it and felt something metal that moved away when I touched it, something loose, snaking through the groove. I'd never noticed the groove before, but for good reason. The metal was practically the color of the cement, standing out only in the direct sunlight. It was probably invisible for anyone above water vantage points, and the glass warped the view too much to make the bottom visible with the underwater viewing areas. I had no idea what the groove could be for. My first thought was filtration, but there was a standard filtration grate not too far away. I moved my hand along the groove and for a few seconds and found a few screws bolting the metal tightly to the floor. I followed the groove a bit, seeing that it passed under the wire mesh that marked the beginning of Hildegard's enclosure and kept going as far as I could see. It seemed to be following the path of the river itself, as though it ran the entire length of the exhibit. In the distance, the massive shape of Hildegard hippo pranced with surprising grace along the aquarium floor. My flesh went cold. You weren't supposed to swim with hippos. Even the gentlest ones were temperamental, prone to inexplicable attacks. Back in Africa, you didn't even want to be in a boat when hippos were around. You'd heard plenty of stories of hippos overturning canoes and fishing boats and then assaulting whoever had been in there. And I'd heard the occasional tale of them attacking swimmers as well, so my guard went up, even though the wire mesh was between Hildegard and me. Fun Jungle claimed the mesh had been designed to withstand the attack of a 4,000-pound hippopotamus, but then engineers had been known to fail. I held as still as I could, watching Hildegard. It appeared to me she hadn't seen me. Instead, she jogged up to one of the underwater viewing windows. Suddenly, something sharp jabbed me in the rear. I yelped and whirled in the water. Summer floated behind me, laughter echoing through a breathing hose. She held something up. It glinted in the diluted sunlight. I gave her a nasty of a glare as I could muster, which wasn't much, and then I held out my hand. She dropped the object into it. It was a small metal ball with 6 barbs sticking out of it, north, south, east, west, top, and bottom. Some of the barbs had been filled with sharp points. Some were rather blunt. It had been done quickly, without much care for quality. One barb still had the remnant of even a smaller ball at the tip. Overall, it was maybe an inch across. It was a jack, or it had been. Now it was most definitely a murder weapon. I tried to ask, "Where'd you find it?" It didn't come out quite right, given the hose jammed in my mouth, but Summer got the idea. She pointed toward the far side of the enclosure, where there was a small dip in the concrete floor. I wondered if there might be more filed jacks in there, enough to prove someone had made a concerted effort to feed them to Henry. I started swimming that way. A shadow fell over me. Hildegard had noticed us. She loomed on the other side of the wire mesh. Her eyes narrowed in what looked like anger. On second thought, one jack was enough. We kicked for the surface and scrambled out of the water. That's all for today. Can't wait for tomorrow. Thanks for listening.